section 1.1, which is points, lines, and planes. Maybe you've heard some of those terms, maybe you've heard all of those terms, but we're going to talk about that. It's super important though, as our first section of geometry, that you understand notation, and that from here on out, this is how we properly write these things out, so that we use a proper notation with a point, a line, a plane, anything else that we learn from here on out for the rest of the school year. So let's look at some definitions here. So undefined terms consist of a point, a line, and a plane. And so when I talk about undefined terms, these are things that we're saying, okay, this is what they're going to look like. But out in the real world, we can't easily spot a point or a line, but maybe it's there. So a point is something that has no dimension. We represent that on like a piece of paper by a dot. So a dot represents a point. When we write a point, if I ask you to identify a point on a diagram, you would specifically use the term point and then whatever letter it is. If it doesn't have a dot next to it, it is not a point. So point A is a point down here. This M is not a point. And so you could not say that is point M because it doesn't have a dot next to it. A line, you talked a lot about in Algebra 1, has one dimension. It is represented with two arrowheads. So if you are drawing a line, it must have two arrows on each end so that it, like if somebody's reading this diagram, we know that it is a line. If not, then it's represented by a segment. And we know that a line is created through any 2 points. So we must have 2 points through that line. Every line, there's exactly one that goes through 2 points. And so we can name a line. There's lots of ways that we can name it. First, if there is a lowercase letter off to the side that doesn't have a dot, we can name it by that. So I can just say line L. I can also use the 2 points that are on that line, and I can say line AB, and I can specifically write it out. I can also be lazy, and I can say AB right here with the line above it and an arrow on each end. You can also flip-flop the letters. It doesn't matter the order when you are naming a line, so you could say line BA, or you could write it out with the notation and say BA with a line above it. The only thing that you cannot do is you could not say line L like this and put a line above it. If you are using the notation, it must have 2 points. And then a plane is something that has 2 dimensions. It is represented by a shape. Oftentimes, if we are drawing it on a piece of paper, like a rectangle or a parallelogram, and if we're talking about it in our classroom, I would refer to it as the wall or the floor, but it extends kind of like a line with no end, so it goes on forever. But to name a line, there are 3 points that make up a plane, and they cannot be points that are all on the same line. So you can use 3 points that are not all on the same line to name a plane. So you might want to underline that piece. And so for this one here, just like with a point, we have to specifically say plane. And then I can say these 3 points because clearly I can't make a line with those 3 points. So I would say plane ABC. I could also, just like a line, if there is a letter in the corner that is not associated with a point, so M here is not associated with a point, I can also say this is plane M as well. There's not really a short way to do this. You do have to write out the word plane. And then a couple other definitions. Collinear points are points that lie on the same line. So if I ask you to give me a pair of collinear points, you would name me 2 points on the same line. For example, AC, pretend that I can draw, are on the same line. I could also say AB are collinear points. Clearly my drawing skills need a little help. And then coplanar points are points that are all in the same plane. And so again, if we're looking at this plane up here, A, B, and C are all points that lie in the same plane. So co kind of means that we're sharing, And so collinear, they're sharing the same line, so they're on the same line. Coplanar, they share that plane, and so they're points that are all in that plane. Okay, so if we look at this example, we're just naming points, lines, and planes. So maybe pause here and see that you can name these on your own before we do them, just to see. And if you can name them, make sure that you're using the proper notation. So A says give two other names for line PQ and plane L. So I'm just going to start with this PQ. So here is line PQ. And so on that line, another way to name it, well, I only have 2 points. So I could say QP. And I couldn't just leave it like that. I could write the word line in front of it, or I can use my notation for line. And then because there isn't a third point there for me to name it like with another point, I do have this lowercase letter here. So I could say line N. And remember, I could not say line N like that. That is not okay. Has to be 2 points if we're going to use the notation, and N is not a point. For the second part, to name plane R, so for a plane, you need 3 points, and 3 points that are not on the same line. So I could say plane R, which is how they used it. I could not say plane M, because M is associated with that line, and it's a lowercase letter, so I couldn't say that. So I have to use 3 points, and they cannot be on the same line. So when you look here at like S, P, T, those are all on the same line. So I pick a point that's not on that line, so I could say V, S, P, that would work. And I have to specifically say plane. And it doesn't matter the order. I could say V, S, P. If you wrote it in a different order with those same 3 letters, that's great. Another name that I could use, I could switch out my S and use T. So I could say plane T, P, V. So 3 points together, no commas in between when we name a plane, but we have to specifically say that it's a plane. All right, part B. Name 3 points that are collinear, and then name 4 points that are coplanar. So co meaning that we're sharing. So 3 points that are on the same line, that are sharing the same line. Well, there's only 3 points that are on the same line anywhere in this picture. So I would specifically say points. And then I would use those 3 points that are on the same line. So I would say points S, comma, P, comma, T. So when we're naming points, we can just use like one word points. I don't have to write point S, point P, but use commas in between when naming. And then the second part of that says name 4 points that are coplanar. So share the same plane. And again, there's only 4 points on this plane because M is not a point and R is not a point. So I've got V, S, P, and T. Okay, so let's look at some more definitions here. Okay. So I said at the beginning that points, lines, and planes are undefined terms. So from here on out, in geometry, terms that can be described using a point or a line are called defined terms. So if we can use these in the definition, then these are defined terms. So a ray and a segment and opposite rays, those are all defined terms because we're using a point, a line, and eventually a plane in some of those definitions. So Segment and ray, you've probably heard about those before. A segment is a starting and stopping point. So we can measure a segment where a line goes on forever, but it consists of two endpoints, so a start and a stop. And so when we do a segment, we do have points on each end. When we name a segment, kind of like a line, it doesn't matter the order that we do it. So I can say AB, and I just have a segment above it. Or I can say segment BA, and I can have a segment above it. So it doesn't matter the order on those, but it does consist of 2 points. A ray consists of an endpoint. So a ray does have like a starting point, and then it continues on in one direction. So it does have an arrow. So it does matter the order that you name a ray. You always start with the starting point, which is our end point. And so when I'm naming this top ray, I would name it A, B. And then I always have like my starting point here and then my arrow on the right-hand side. And so that lets me know, if I wasn't given a picture, but somebody said, draw ray AB like that, I know that A is the starting point and B is the end that goes on forever. Same thing with the second one. When I name it, B is now my starting point, and A continues on forever. So these are not the same ray. It does matter the order that you write a ray. And then opposite rays, if point C lies on line AB, so here's our line AB, and here is point C, then ray CA and CB are opposite rays. So CA starts at C, continues on to the left, and then CB starts at C and continues on to the right. They are opposite rays. So segments and rays are collinear when they lie on the same line. So opposite rays are collinear. And then lines, segments, and rays are coplanar when they lie on the same plane. So really kind of the same definitions there that we use with points, just with rays and segments as well. So we're going to just go through this example, naming segments and rays and opposite rays. So give another name for GH. So take note what GH is. Look at the notation. This is a segment. It's not a line. So give another name for GH. So take a second and think about that. On this one, here's segment GH. There's only one way to name it, which is just to turn it around. So H. And then on this second one, name all rays with endpoints J. So here is, let me use a different color, J. And so name all rays with endpoint J. So that would kind of be our starting point. So I could say JF. And make sure that you're using proper notation. I could say JG. I could say JE. And then last but not least, I could say JH. And I know that this part kind of like contradicted what I said. I said if it doesn't have a point there, it's not considered one. But since they're specifically saying endpoint J, then there must be a point there. It's not on the end of a line for us to say, okay, we can name it line J. Excuse me. And then it says, the second part says, which of these rays are opposite rays? And so again, they have to be collinear for them to be opposite rays. And so here we have JG and JH would be opposite rays. And we have JF and JE, which would be opposite rays. The last part we're really just going to kind of talk about in class, but sketching intersections. And so on Monday we are going to do some sketches in class on your desks. But two or more geometric figures intersect when they have one or more points in common. Again, you talked a lot in algebra about systems of equations, and so that was finding the point where those two lines intersect. So when two lines intersect, they intersect at one unique point. And so for this one would be point A. When a plane intersects, when two planes intersect, they intersect at a line. And think about it, if you look at the wall and the floor, they have a seam where like maybe the carpet and the wall meet. That is a line, and so that is where those two planes intersect. So the intersection of two different planes is a line. You might want to make note of that because you might not have talked about that, but we'll do some drawings in class just to kind of go over this and make sure that you have your notation down.